protected the use of contraception and same-sex relationships and same-sex marriage. Justice Clarence Thomas, writing in his concurring opinion, quote, "In future cases, we should reconsider all of the court's substantive due process precedents, including Griswold, Lawrence, and Obergefell." Those rulings Thomas called errors and said the court has a duty to correct them. As CNN's Manu Raji reports for us now, Republicans are largely celebrating today, but for abortion rights advocates, the ruling has unleashed a torrent of criticism, grief, panic, and fear.
We trust women. We won't go back.
Casting aside 50 years of settled law, the Supreme Court ended a woman's constitutional right to an abortion, and in the process, roiled the nation's political landscape.
I am spitting mad over this.
Roe versus Wade belongs on the ash heap of history with Dred Scott and Plessy.
Justice Samuel Alito, writing for the conservative majority in a 5-4 opinion, called Roe v. Wade egregiously wrong and deeply damaging. The 3 liberal justices dissenting, warning the ruling will lead to the curtailment of women's rights and of their status as free and equal citizens. On Capitol Hill, the reaction was swift.
Disgraceful, disgraceful judgment.
It is absolutely a major issue on the ballot.
Largest governmental overreach in the history of our lifetime.
House GOP leader Kevin McCarthy told CNN he supports codifying a 15-week abortion ban at the national level. The Supreme Court upheld Mississippi's 15-week ban in its ruling overturning Roe, with the support of Chief Justice John Roberts, who opposed overturning Roe entirely.
The right to life has been vindicated. The voiceless will finally have a voice.
Congressional Democrats left with little recourse, given they lack 60 votes in the Senate to overcome a GOP filibuster.
The senator from my state, the senator from West Virginia, senators from everywhere, if you say that you're for women, then do not use an old law that was not even, again, in the Constitution of the United States to stop protection for them.
But 2 Democratic senators stand in the way of changing the filibuster rules, fearing a future GOP majority would enact an even more conservative agenda. At the White House, President Biden called for electing more Democrats to Congress.
This fall, Roe is on the ballot. Personal freedoms are on the ballot. The right to privacy, liberty, equality, they're all on the ballot.
While Democrats hope the issue motivates voters in November, many Republicans believe the midterms will turn on the economy.
Most people are pretty entrenched with what they believe on this particular issue and what ought to happen.
But the fight ultimately may be on the state level. 26 states likely to ban abortion completely, including 13 that set abortion bans into motion as soon as Roe is overturned. The emotion palpable in the streets.
This decision is an outrage.
It is one important victory. It's not the end, but we are dancing on the grave of Roe versus Wade.
Now, some reaction from the 2 key senators who played the decisive role to ensure that Brett Kavanaugh was confirmed in 2018. Susan Collins of Maine, Joe Manchin of West Virginia, both of them contending that Kavanaugh and Gorsuch were not necessarily straightforward, in fact, misleading in how they said that they would hold legal precedent, both in their testimony and when they spoke with them. Collins saying that the decision is inconsistent with what Gorsuch and Kavanaugh said in their meetings, and because they both were insistent of the importance of upholding longstanding legal precedent. Jake.
All right, Manu Raja on Capitol Hill, thank you. Today's Supreme Court decision has near immediate impact in 13 different states that have so-called trigger laws, specifically banning abortion once the court has overturned Roe. This has already gone into effect in half of the states you see highlighted on this map. The other half will go into effect in the next 30 days. We should note we know another dozen or so states that have plans to introduce laws banning abortion after this ruling. CNN's Nadia Romero joins us now live from Jackson, Mississippi, where an abortion ban will go into effect within 10 days with almost no exceptions. Nadia, walk us through exactly what happens now for Mississippi women and girls who need or want to seek an abortion.
Well, Jake, it doesn't happen right away. The law doesn't go into effect. There's about a 10-day grace period here because the Attorney General has to certify this into law. So for the next 10 days or so, women can still come to this facility behind me. This is the last standing abortion clinic in the state of Mississippi. And right on that sidewalk behind me is where they're often met with dozens of protesters with signs and bullhorns trying to convince them to turn around and not get an abortion. And the folks that work work here at this clinic tell me that they were out this morning telling women that this place had shut down, that they could no longer get an abortion, that it was illegal. That's not true, and that's their big message. They want people to know that if you come out to this facility, you can still get an abortion here in the state of Mississippi over those next 10 days, and they will still be performing those abortions. Many of the people here were very upset, feeling that there was a lot of misinformation out on the internet and in social media to encourage women not to come out here today. So you can still get an abortion in the state of Mississippi through the next 10 days. After that, women will have to turn to trust funds. The pink house behind me has a pink fund where women can access different monetary amounts to help them travel to other states to get abortions, to get that health care. Jake?
What's been the reaction like in Mississippi to the ruling today?
Well, for women here and men who work at this clinic, this was the saddest of sad days. With that memo, the leak that this was coming, they tried to prepare themselves, but all of them told me, Jake, that there was no way to prepare for that ruling, that decision coming down from the Supreme Court. Many of them had risked their own lives, getting death threats and being followed home by who they call religious terrorists, people who would come out and protest the clinic. And so we saw a lot of tears, a lot of heads hung low. Many people who believe that this is the worst day in American history and during their lifetime. But this is a very day full of jubilation and celebration for people who know that Mississippi is ground zero for this. We heard from the governor who says that this is a day to celebrate because it was this law in Mississippi, the 15-week ban, Jake, that pushed this through to the Supreme Court, and they saw plenty of failures being struck down by different federal judges. But since 2018, pushing this forward through the highest court of the land and finally getting the ruling that they wanted. Jake?
All right, Nadia Romero reporting live for us from Jackson, Mississippi. Thanks so much. Joining us now is Democratic Congresswoman Barbara Lee of California. Congresswoman, thanks so much for joining us. You've been very open about what it was like for you to seek an abortion in the days before Roe v. Wade. So what was your reaction to today's news that we are going back to that?
Well, I tell you, Jake, even though we knew it was coming, this was gut-wrenching. It's heartbreaking. And it's the first time, mind you, that the Supreme Court has taken away a constitutional right, which has taken us backwards. And yes, I remember the days before Roe. We cannot go back. You heard earlier the types of decisions that could come down that are going to take away other rights from people. And so this is a crisis. It's a constitutional crisis, if you ask me. Well, then in the day before Roe, it was illegal to have an abortion. Now they're trying to criminalize abortions once again. People should have their own right to make their own healthcare decisions, not judges nor politicians.
So, I mean, Roe v. Wade became law of the land in 1973. So probably most people watching us right now do not know or remember what it was like before Roe v. Wade. So what was it like?
Before Roe versus Wade, first of all, abortions were illegal. The primary cause of Black women's death during that period were septic abortions. Yes, I had an abortion. It was illegal. I had to leave California, go back to El Paso, Texas, go across the border to Mexico, go to a back alley, and I was terrified. First of all, I was terrified that I might die, but secondly, I was terrified because I knew it was illegal. And coming back across the border, I didn't know if I was going to get stopped. I didn't know getting into California if I was going to get stopped and arrested. And so we're back at the days now where abortions and abortion providers are going to be criminalized. And that is horrific. That's terrible. And we cannot let this happen. And so we cannot go back. And we said earlier, trust women. We're going to deal with this. We're going to see those who are trying to take away a woman's right to make her own decisions about her own reproductive decisions, her freedom to decide. We're going to see them at the ballot box in November, because this is a terrible, terrible moment. But it's also a moment, like you said, where many do not know a world without Roe. And believe you me, I am convinced that people are going to show up, because you saw and you mentioned what the poll said earlier. People support Roe, whether you agree with abortions or not. People support a person's right to make their own healthcare decisions about their reproductive rights.
Last month, you told me that one of your many concerns about today is how this ruling will disproportionately impact low-income women who are disproportionately minority because they will not have the same ability to travel to states where abortion remains legal. Some states, such as Missouri, have even sought to ban residents from traveling outside the state to get an abortion. Now, Justice Kavanaugh is trying to tamp down concerns on that. He wrote, quote, may a state bar a resident of that state from traveling to another state to obtain an abortion? In my view, the answer is no, based on the constitutional right to interstate travel. But how concerned are you about this issue?
I'm very concerned because, like I said, they're trying to take away all of our constitutional rights, quite frankly. So we have to be very concerned. I'm glad the president spoke out today about that. Black and brown women disproportionately are low income, unfortunately. And so they don't have the money. We don't have the money to travel to other states. We don't have the money to provide, to be able to pay for childcare. We don't have the money because we're primarily low wage workers. So how in the world are we even going to travel even without a travel ban? And so, yes, this is impacting rural women, younger women, women of color. It's impacting Black and brown people in disproportionate rates. And so you understand the racist nature also of this decision. And again, the ballot box, we have got to elect state and local officials who trust women and who know that a personal decision about their own reproductive decisions is personal, it's private, just like it was with me. I did not want to talk about it because it was private, but I was forced to behind what was taking place in Mississippi and Texas and now. And that's the decision that people should be able to make without interference. And so we're going to have to help fund people who want to travel. We're going to have to make sure these states elect people who really support and trust women in their decisions that they make. So we're going to fight, though. We're in no way taking this sitting down. We're going to fight and show up at the ballot box like you would not believe. It's galvanizing a heck of a lot of people who never thought they would see this day.
Congresswoman Barbara Lee, thank you so much. Appreciate your time. How will the monumental Supreme Court decision stripping the right to an abortion impact women's health care? You're looking at live pictures right now of the crowds gathered outside the High Court in Washington, D.C. A doctor is going to join us to weigh in on the medical impact of this all next. Then a historic vote in the House, the most significant federal gun reforms in a generation, now headed to President Biden's resolute desk. Stay with us.
What do you see when you look at the surface? Just that, the surface. But dive deeper and new possibilities emerge. Essential intelligence from S&P Global takes you here, providing the data, risk assessment, and workflow solutions you need to plumb the wonders beneath. A better, more prosperous future awaits. It's yours for the seeking. S&P Global. Seek and prosper.
We share this place. Redwood Materials is a sustainable battery materials company. So, we focus on, building a closed loop ecosystem for lithium-ion batteries. We recycle old lithium-ion batteries of all different types, both automotive, but also consumer electronics. We take the materials out of those batteries, refine them, extract them, and then remanufacture them into new components that can go directly back into battery manufacture. So I see this eventually, going to be the vast majority of the materials that are going into batteries that will be recycled in the future. Batteries are amazing because they are so recyclable. More than 90% of the materials, those critical materials in the battery, can be reused many, many times without degradation. I think people are really realizing the benefits of having a high recycled material content, both in terms of the environmental footprint of the batteries, but also the cost of those materials.
This is the work that continues. Who we are today and what we can become.
This is journalism that reflects the world we live in.
Sunday on CNN. In a year full of challenges, let's salute those going the extra mile, using their platforms for good. CNN Heroes Salutes, hosted by Aaron Burnett, Sunday.
In our health lead, the U.S. Supreme Court's ruling will impact women and girls' reproductive health care around the United States. U.S. Surgeon General Vivek Murthy issued a statement on the ruling today saying, quote, "The health of women and pregnant people is put at risk, an effect that will be felt disproportionately in historically marginalized populations, including communities of color, low-income Americans, and rural residents." With us to discuss the health impact of this all is OBGYN Dr. Jennifer Gunter. Dr. Gunter, thanks for joining us. So according to Guttmacher, nearly 1 in 4 women in the United States will have an abortion by age 45. So what does this ruling mean to 1/4 of American women and girls?
Yeah, I mean, it means poverty. We know lack of access to having abortion increases your likelihood that you will live in poverty. It means an increased risk of maternal deaths from illegal abortion, from complications during pregnancy that we now can't manage because there's fetal cardiac activity, and maternal death from pregnancy complications. It also means people who have a miscarriage might have difficulty getting access to drugs to treat that, or an ectopic pregnancy, and it could even impact contraception. It's absolutely far-reaching and devastating.
Well, let's talk about the pregnancies that are complicated, complication issues, health issues. What does the ruling mean for those patients?
Well, it means in many states, doctors won't be able to do anything because many states don't have a health exception, but even if they do, they're uninterpretable. I've personally been in a situation with a sick patient who had a serious medical condition, and her physicians felt her health would be improved if she were not pregnant. And we had a law where we couldn't do abortions at our medical facility. And I had to call the politician who wrote the law at home to get permission.
I know someone who had a very problem pregnancy where the brain of the fetus was actually growing outside of the skull. There was no way that this baby was going to live, and the mom got an abortion. That mom would be forced in some of these states, like South Dakota or Oklahoma, forced to carry the child to term?
Right. And now imagine, say you're pregnant with, and so now you have all these people touching your belly and asking you, about your baby that is going to be born to die. But imagine if you get a pregnancy complication. Say you get really high blood pressure at 32 weeks, and then we want to deliver you early, but that fetus is going to die when it's born. So have we now done an abortion? I mean, the laws are really uninterpretable.
Something else, and you touched on this, I don't know if folks understand, quite often a woman who miscarries has to then go get an abortion. Can you explain that?
Yeah, absolutely. So sometimes when people have a miscarriage, they have what we called, a missed abortion or incomplete. And so the process starts, but it doesn't finish. And so we prescribe medications, the same medications that we use for medical abortion. There have already been women reporting online. I've seen reports on Facebook of them showing up to pharmacies, asking for their prescription and being turned away because the pharmacist was worried they were having an abortion.
Wisconsin Planned Parenthood says that they've paused all abortion procedures until there's clarification on whether or not Wisconsin's 1849 law is enforceable. We've heard the argument that even if abortion's not legal in one state, a woman can travel to another state to receive the procedure. But what's your take on whether this increased influx to abortion clinics in other states might make it more difficult for women to have access to time-sensitive appointments?
Well, yeah, I mean, if you have to book airfares and travel, and never mind the cost or knowing how to find access to people who might be able to provide funding for you, and then it's time away. And if, many people who have abortions have other children, so then you have to, arrange childcare. Every single time you make it harder for people to access care, you increase cost. The point is the cruelty.
So Justice Clarence Thomas argued in a concurring opinion that the court should also reconsider other related rulings on same-sex relationships, that's Lawrence, on same-sex marriage, that's Obergefell, and on contraception, that's the Griswold decision, Griswold v. Connecticut. Now, this is not part of the ruling itself, but what was your reaction as an OBGYN? There are a lot of women out there who obviously rely on birth control pills and contraception.
Well, I mean, my response is this is fascism. I mean, it's really what it is. We should call it what it is. This is fascism. Restricting people, making up lies about how contraception works, making up lies about abortion, to sort of get your ideology across is fascism. We have contraception saves lives. Having people being able to control their reproductive destiny is so important, never mind all the medical conditions that hormonal contraception can treat. And so, I mean, we already have a problem with contraception when we had the Hobby Lobby case, which, allowed basically employers, if they believe a contraception is abortion, they're allowed to sort of use that as a back way around it. And, this is absolutely absurd that we're even thinking about this. And what's on the table is huge.
Dr. Jennifer Gunter, thank you so much. Appreciate your time today.
Thank you for having me.
The other Supreme Court precedents that might be at risk are same-sex marriage and contraception. Next on the chopping block. Stay with us.
When you follow a story, you may be asked to take risks and sometimes go down a path that's not marked.
Where Iraqi troops would pre-position and these Americans would advise them.
These protests are a test for Hamas.
Any understanding between Israel and Gaza could quickly fall apart again.
The protesters are just outside a military base. They're throwing rocks and security forces firing tear gas.
When you dare to take risks, you witness passion and persistence.
And they just want to get their past be processed so they can get out of this facility.
And that's where change happens.
The one thing they have in common is a determination to keep going.
CNN.
As the sun sets in Seoul and Shanghai, deals are signed in Dubai, and Europe is already in play. New York prepares to make its first move. I'm Julia Chatterley, host of CNN's First Move. I'll speak to newsmakers, risk takers, and the ultimate game changers. Bold moves, big deals, winning trades. It's all right here. Make CNN your first move.
First Move with Julia Chatterley, weekdays.
We're here at the home of one of the FSB team. Was it your team that poisoned Navalny?
What do you want the world to know?
People are so exhausted. Just gonna help her carry this bag.
Scores of Taliban fighters, and just behind us, the U.S. Embassy. I'm the one who has to look them in the eye. Can I have your word? These people are depending on you. Now they're pressing in. They want desperately to tell their stories.
This is CNN.
Neil Gorsuch, for whom you voted, don't you think he's probably going to vote to overturn Roe versus Wade if given the chance?
I actually don't. I had a very long discussion with Justice Gorsuch in my office, and he pointed out to me that he is a co-author of a whole book on precedent.
That aged well. We're back in our politics lead with more on the shockwave and impact from the nation's highest court, striking down Roe v. Wade, the landmark 1973 ruling, the legalized abortion nationwide. Let's discuss. Now, Jonah, you have written that Roe v. Wade should be overturned because it was a, quote, fatally flawed constitutional ruling and that overturning it would be good for the country. Why?
Well, I can get into the, because it's made up law in terms of it's being bad.
That's basically what Alito said.
It's basically, and look, it's what Ruth Bader Ginsburg said. She said it would be much better if they had grounded the abortion right in equal protection instead of a due process claim. I think it's good for the country because for the first time in a very long time, this question gets put back to the states and to voters and to legislatures. All these politicians, whether they're pro-choice or pro-life, can't hide behind the Supreme Court making these decisions for them. They have to make the arguments themselves. It'll send this stuff back to the places where it belongs. And it doesn't mean I'm sympathetic to Justice Roberts' concurrence. I think the argument of the majority is correct on the merits, but this is also just a huge shock to the system. And it's going to be a while before it works itself out. And it could have political consequences that are bad for Republicans or good for Democrats or something totally unforeseeable. But on the merits, I think it's the right decision.
Well, if I may,
yeah.
3 of us at this table today now don't have the same rights as the 2 of you to control our own bodies. That's what happened today. And so I disagree because fundamentally, obviously, what we're talking about and the way Americans see this, right, is it's not just about abortion. It's about the fundamental right to control your own body. And frankly, it is also about whether or not government should be making these personal private decisions or women. Now that it does go back to the states and frankly goes back to the electorate in the context of this election, I think you're going to see Democrats obviously pushing this issue. A majority of Americans support Roe v. Wade, and Republican candidates are going to have to take a position, not just on Roe v. Wade. Thanks to Clarence Thomas, they're also going to have to talk about contraception. They're also going to have to talk about marriage equality because he certainly made it clear that this underlying right to privacy is also something that we consider.
Yeah, as a political matter, I think you're entirely right, or that's entirely fair. Justice Thomas was writing alone. Brett Kavanaugh directly rejected that. You can't get to a majority without Brett Kavanaugh. He's been in the majority more than any other justice. You don't have 5 votes to get rid of.
Brett Kavanaugh also said something about the precedent of Roe v. Wade in his hearing, so I'm not sure I take his judgment. I'm not sure we can trust him.
I think the media has been completely wrong about these guys misleading the public about what they said about
that's not
precedents.
true?
I think it's
not fair.
I can't speak to what he said, what anybody said to Susan Collins in private.
Because Manchin says the same thing too. They both of them have said that Kavanaugh and Gorsuch misled them. Both
Look, they gave political answers in a political process, but like the quotes attributed to Amy Coney Barrett about precedents can't be overturned was taken out of context.
Totally,
about
100%. She was pretty
whatnot.
clear about what she was going to do. No question about that. Let me ask you something, because Jonah alluded to this. It does seem like John Roberts, as somebody said earlier, this is not the John Roberts court anymore. He had a path, and the other conservative justice, he wanted to allow Mississippi to ban abortions at 15 weeks, and that was, I guess, going to be some sort of middle ground on this, but not overturn Roe v. Wade. And the other justices said nope.
No. 2 things. First of all, it is still John Roberts' court on racial remedies, on religion, and on guns. Remember, this is one area where he wanted a compromise. He said, not yet. He was ready to uphold the 15-week ban on abortions from Mississippi, but he reminded everyone, when they took this case, they said they were only going to be looking at that. They weren't going to be looking at overturning Roe v. Wade. But Mississippi officials, seeing Amy Coney Barrett take her seat, they pushed for more. And he said, we should wait. He's certainly sympathetic with where the majority is, but he just didn't want it to go now. And he had a really interesting line, Jake, that I think reflects a kind of overt humility that we haven't seen from him, where he said, both sides, the majority and dissent, seem to be free of doubt. I don't share that freedom from doubt here. I think that this is more complex. So that's where he's coming from. It's not entirely John Roberts' court the way it was before Anthony Kennedy, right after Anthony Kennedy left and he had so much control. Having this supermajority removes him from many equations.
I think that's such an interesting point about his concurrence and this idea of doubt, because both the gun decision and the abortion decision were rooted in this idea that they know what history is, and that if it's not rooted in history, it doesn't exist. And that's, their understanding of history is what it is, but I think that as the American people evaluate the court's role in setting the terms of their lives, that's going to be a big issue. How many Americans are going to be looking at what is rooted in our country's history and saying they want that to be determinative of the rights that they have today in the year 2022? It's one of the reasons why on abortion, when you have a country where almost 70% of Americans say they want to keep Roe versus Wade in place, and then the court does what the 35 or 36% of Americans want, it leads to real questions about how long that kind of imbalance between what the court is doing and what the public wants can continue.
Well, especially given that, and actually the numbers I've seen are closer to 80% of Americans support Roe v. Wade, about 75% say that they actually would not vote for someone who did not support Roe v. Wade. But also, let's remember, I'm 55 years old. For 50 years of my life, I've had a right that I now no longer have. I think the court also not understanding how this feels, what this means to people to say, we are taking this away from you. You had a right at the beginning of the day.
It's not where their head is at.
No, they don't care.
They know.
But
know
that goes to this
legitimacy issue. They know how people
issue.
feel, but that didn't matter.
I think they would disagree, though. I think if I were Samuel Alito, and I'm not, but I think he would say, I'm just letting the states decide. You have in Washington, D.C., the same rights that you had yesterday. And that's what I believe Alito.
Yeah, well, moreover, I understand that the polling on Roe v. Wade, qua Roe v. Wade, is what it is. The polling on actual sort of unfettered restrictions in the first 15 weeks versus second term and versus third term are much closer to the pro-life position, or at least the anti-Roe position, than a lot of people are talking about. Moreover, I agree emotions are high in all this, but politically and sort of culturally, get ready for a lot of people to obsess about Oklahoma City, because in California and in New York, women have not had this right taken away in practical terms. They're going to have the same access to abortion they had before this decision. And so all of the media light, all of the rhetoric from Democrats is going to be aimed at states, justifiably, at places where abortion rights are going to be restricted or access to abortion is going to be restricted. You're going to see in purplish states these fights play out. Virginia already has said, Glenn Youngkin has said he's going to look at a 15-week.
The governor.
And that's actually still better access to abortion than a lot of European countries.
What you're going to see, I can tell you, the Democratic strategy is you have Mitch McConnell and Republicans saying they are open to a 100% all-out ban on abortion. So when we are talking about control of the Senate, and again, our data shows this is not only an issue that motivates voters, it mobilizes voters.
I mean, I think that that's exactly right. The problem, Jonah, is that the reality is that the position that a lot of conservatives have, top to bottom, from Oklahoma all the way to Washington, is that abortion should be illegal nationwide. And as long as that is the position, it's not hyperbole to suggest that that is what is coming next. And beyond that, I mean, there are some pretty large states where a lot of people live where abortion is restricted today and could be severely restricted. Just think about the state of Texas. A lot of Democrats and liberals live in Texas, but their rights to an abortion are going to be restricted.
Let me ask, what do you think it means that the governor of Florida, who may well be the next president or the next Republican nominee, DeSantis, that he could, let's be honest, he could pass anything, and the Florida legislature, you know, if you wanted to Mount Rushmore of his face 4 times, they would do it. Ron DeSantis passed a 15-week ban. He did not pass a all-out ban. Now, I'm not saying the 15-week ban is great or not, but I mean, he went to the muddy middle, you know what I mean, which is probably where polling indicates people are.
That's exactly right. And that's where, you know, John Roberts, who's very politically savvy, I should say that for most of my time covering the Supreme Court, I never thought they'd reverse Roe because they were smart Republicans who didn't want to hand Democrats an issue. I don't know if this decision is going to do that, but let me just say, talking about the middle, John Roberts, that's where he wanted to go.
I'll let you have the final word, but keep it quick.
This middle that we're talking about, a ban is a ban is a ban, and the issue for a lot of these voters is who decides. Is it a politician or is it the woman, regardless of the
Well, we're going to keep talking about this for many, many months, so thanks one and all for being here. And of course, this programming note, if you're like me, you didn't get enough Abby Phillip just now. So if you're like me, you can watch Abby Phillip on Inside Politics Sunday morning at 8 a.m. Eastern. Everyone tune in. As gun reform legislation heads to President Biden's desk for his signature, we're going to take a look at one section of that bill that almost tanked the whole deal. Stay with us.
When you follow a story, you may be asked to take risks. And sometimes go down a path that's not marked.
Where Iraqi troops would pre-position and these Americans would advise them.
These protests are a test for Hamas.
Any understanding between Israel and Gaza could quickly fall apart again.
The protesters are just outside a military base. They're throwing rocks and security forces firing tear gas.
When you dare to take risks, you witness passion and persistence.
And they just want to get their past be processed so they can get out of this facility.
And that's where change happens.
The one thing they have in common is a determination to keep going.
try to be global and we try to be smart. And we try very hard to get both of those every week. What I want to hear are authentic voices of people who are passionate or intelligent about a subject, who will make you smarter, move you emotionally, who will kind of challenge your mind or move your heart. And that's the consistency that we try to get at.
Fareed Zakaria, GPS, Sundays on CNN.
President Biden is expected to sign the newly passed bipartisan gun bill into law, marking the first major federal gun safety legislation in decades. It includes $750 million for crisis intervention programs, a requirement for more gun sellers to register as a federally licensed firearm dealer, and a more thorough review process for 18 to 21-year-olds looking to buy guns. The House passed the bipartisan bill today, with 14 House Republicans joining the Democrats. The bill was in jeopardy at one point because of the provision called closing the so-called boyfriend loophole. That's a loophole that allows domestic abusers who are not married, not living with, or do not have a child with the victim to own a gun. And believe it or not, there are folks here in Washington, D.C., lobbying to make sure that guys who beat up their girlfriends are able to buy guns. For the first time in nearly 3 decades,
an amendment is agreed to.
Congress has passed a major gun safety bill with bipartisan support.
I would argue it will save thousands of lives.
We're considering a bipartisan bill that will make our country safer without making it any less free. This is the sweet spot.
The compromise package does not include all the broad measures Democrats sought, but it does include a variety of significant steps, from increased funding for mental health to more comprehensive background checks for 18 to 21-year-olds. And it includes one key provision that almost tanked the whole deal.
Operating under the boyfriend loophole.
The so-called boyfriend loophole continues to be a challenge.
We're going to close the boyfriend loophole.
Closing the boyfriend loophole, a long-standing goal of advocates for domestic abuse victims.
The boyfriend loophole is a gap in federal law.
A gap because right now, federal law only bans domestic abusers from buying or owning guns if they were convicted of abuse of a parent, spouse, someone with whom they share a child, or a significant other they were living with at the time. But what about abusive relationships where the couple is dating, but do not fit into those other classifications? According to the Johns Hopkins Center for Gun Violence Solutions, partner homicides drop 13% when protective orders cover dating partners.
We're going to make sure that every domestic abuser, whether it be a spouse or a boyfriend, has their guns taken away.
Yet, despite the fact that researchers have found more than half of the gunmen who committed mass shootings between 2014 and 2019 either killed an intimate partner or family member or had a history of domestic violence, the National Rifle Association has lobbied for years against closing that loophole, arguing that the move, quote, is exploiting real problems like domestic violence to opportunistically target civil rights, like the Second Amendment and constitutional due process. That's right. People who beat up their girlfriends have lobbyists fighting to preserve their ability to buy guns. And gun safety advocates say the NRA's due process argument is a moot point under the new bill.
This bill goes out of its way to ensure that due process protections are included.
So with this newly passed bill, is the boyfriend loophole finally closed? No, it is not.
They went a long way toward addressing it, but it only includes people that have been convicted of a misdemeanor crime of domestic violence.
So domestic abusers of a girlfriend or a boyfriend will only have to relinquish their guns if they are convicted of a misdemeanor, which means victims who have taken one of the first steps of getting a restraining order will still have to live knowing their abusers could be fully armed.
These are obviously extremely dangerous individuals, but unfortunately it does not include those who have been served with a domestic violence restraining order. That moment when somebody, a victim of domestic violence, goes to seek a restraining order is often the most dangerous time for that individual.
And perhaps most significantly, this bill only applies to folks who beat their girlfriends after President Biden signs it into law. It does not apply to domestic violence before that point. It does not apply retroactively. And unlike in Florida, where abusers have to prove they're now safe and got their act together, This law has an automatic restoration of all firearms rights after 5 years for one-time offenders. All of which is a win for the NRA, according to the lead Republican negotiator on the bill, Texas Senator John Cornyn, who touted these limitations and others to a room full of his GOP colleagues. Most of his Republican Senate colleagues and the gun groups lobbying for the girlfriend beaters, they still oppose the bill anyway.
I think we've threaded the needle away in a way that protects the right of law-abiding citizens, but tries to get at the root of the problem that produced this shooting in Uvalde and has produced similar shooting elsewhere, and I think ultimately will save lives, and to me that's the ultimate test.
Saving lives. That's what this bill is truly aiming to do, to prevent another school shooting or grocery store massacre or a senseless death of a domestic abuse survivor. So, will it?
Without a doubt. It really is a momentous occasion, and it should not be downplayed. But of course, in my opinion, the work is not done, and we'll keep going and keep fighting to make sure that all of the loopholes in our gun laws are closed moving forward.
According to Everytown for Gun Safety, which is a nonprofit that advocates for stricter gun restrictions, 19 states have already implemented similar provisions to prohibit those convicted of abusing their current and former dating partners from having a gun. A husband and wife in Arizona are subpoenaed as the probe into Donald Trump's fake elector scheme grows. Stay with us.
I would describe One World as compelling, inclusive, and original.
One World with Zain Asher, weeknights on CNN.
Sunday on CNN. In a year full of challenges, let's salute those going the extra mile, using their platforms for good. CNN Heroes Salutes, hosted by Aaron Burnett. Sunday.
We all know that freedom is priceless, but a school for freedom is one hell of a deal. I'm Peggy Callahan. I am the co-founder and CEO of Voices for Freedom. Voices for Freedom is an anti-slavery organization. We are working in India, and we help people to freedom through a project called Schools for Freedom. It turns out that between 110 and 190 people can come to sustainable freedom over 3 years, with their children being educated for a little less than $13,000 a year. In 2017, we took CNN to one of the villages we were working in Uttar Pradesh, India. And they got to see with their own eyes how the system works, how the schools work to help free people, what the conditions people are living in. They got to meet people and know them for themselves. And it really helped that they told this story. It has helped the organization explain it to lots of other people. And today, every single person they met in that village is free.
No holds barred.
Out front tonight, hypocrite in chief.
No nonsense.
How stupid do you think we are?
Because getting to the truth matters. Aaron Burnett out front, Tuesday to Saturday on CNN.
Afghan women are afraid that this is the beginning of your efforts to erase them from the workspace.
Malumness, it's not clear. Even if we appear with the burqa, maybe they will say that women's voices are forbidden.
Did you ever imagine that you would be prevented from going to school?
Girls' education is fundamental to the dignity of Afghan life.
Do you believe that young girls will be allowed to go to school here in Afghanistan?
This is the work that continues. Who we are today and what we can become.
This is journalism that reflects the world we live in.
On the heels of an explosive January 6th hearing, today a new subpoena was issued for the Arizona Republican Party chair Kelly Ward and her husband Michael Ward. A source tells CNN this is part of the federal investigation into those slates of fraudulent electors. Let's bring in CNN's Evan Perez. Evan, what are the Wards suspected of doing, and what does this tell us about the larger federal probe in Donald Trump's efforts to overturn the election?
Well, what this tells us, Jake, is that now everybody, anyone who played a part in this effort to organize this slate of fake electors, is either already subpoenaed or they're about to get subpoenaed. And in this case, we know that these two, we know Kelly Ward was very prominent in the effort to try to get this stuff organized in Arizona, and the idea being that they would be so-called alternate electors for Donald Trump, if that time came to pass, obviously.
Interesting. We also heard three former Trump Justice Department officials yesterday describing how woefully underqualified they thought Trump's Attorney General pick Jeffrey Clark was. They went into quite some detail. We also learned his home was raided before the hearing started. What did investigators take? What were they looking for?
Well, we know that this is part of this investigation, this broader investigation into the effort to overturn the election. And these investigators came in, they spent 3 hours or so, and they had apparently a electronic sniffing dog. He says that they took electronics, but he also describes what he says was this horrific circumstance because he was made to stand out in his jammies while the agents were doing their search. Take a listen.
At one point, 12 agents and 2 Fairfax County police officers went into my house, searched it for 3.5 hours. They even brought along something, Tucker, I've never seen before or heard of, a electronic sniffing dog. And they took all of the electronics from my house.
As you could tell, he's not very familiar with law enforcement.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard of an electronic, but he wanted to be the Attorney General. All right, Evan Perez, thanks so much. We're going to take a quick break. We'll squeeze